Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Samantha Macy. I'm a wealth advisor and certified financial planner here at Boucher Financial Group, and we're excited to talk about our presentation today. It is titled Demystifying RMDs, a Strategy Approach to Retirement Withdrawals. We wanted to cover this topic to help individuals navigate the rules and the nuances of RMDs with confidence as they move forward, and to review some strategies to help minimize the tax impact of their future RMDs. So I'm joined today by my colleague, Harmony Wagner. She is also a CFP and a certified private wealth advisor. And this designation allows Harmony to specialize in working with high net worth individuals and families. Today, we will be discussing what RMDs are, why RMDs are more complex for high net worth individuals, proactive planning tips and strategies, QCDs, Roth conversions, and a case study to show how smart RMD management would impact you over the long term. So I'll be kicking off today's presentation just talking about what RMDs are. And RMDs stand for Required Minimum Distributions. It is the minimum amount you must withdraw from your retirement accounts each year once you reach a certain age. These accounts are traditional IRAs, qualified employer plans like 401ks, 403bs, SEP IRAs, and simple IRAs. So when you reach RMD age, it is the point in the future, or maybe you're currently taking RMDs, where you have to pay taxes on these tax deferred dollars that you put away all that time ago when you originally saved them. Now, the Secure Act 2.0 did raise the RMD age recently. So the new age is 73 or 75, depending on when you were born. So if you look over here to the right, those born between 1951 and 1959 have an RMD age of 73. Those born 1960 or later have an RMD age of 75. Next, we're going to talk about some general rules that RMDs involve. So the first is, how is it calculated? And it is a function of your prior year's balance on 12/31, and that is divided by a life expectancy factor determined by the IRS, and this is calculated annually. So every year you have to go back and calculate this, and tells you what your RMD for that current year would be. RMDs do generally increase over time as you age as well. So when do you have to take your RMD? Well, your first one begins the year that you hit RMD age. So in a lot of our examples, we'll use 73, but that could be 75 based on your birth year. Now, there is a grace period for your first RMD, and that is that it can be delayed and taken by April 1st of the year after you turn 73 or 75, depending on, again, your RMD age. And this can be advantageous to some, but all subsequent RMDs must be taken by 12/31 of each year, which means that if you choose to delay that first one, you still have to take your second one that next year as well. So you would essentially be doubling up on your RMD taxable income in that tax year. So generally speaking, it doesn't make sense for most cases, but it's certainly something to discuss with your advisor to see if this is something you would want to take advantage of. Another rule is that if you have more than one account subject to RMDs, you can withdraw the total RMD amount from a single account. Most people choose to consolidate all of their accounts into one IRA at retirement, but if you do have, let's say, a previous IRA or employer 401k somewhere outside of that IRA where you have consolidated everything else, you will be required to take an RMD from that other account as well. But again, you could take it from one or the other instead of having to take it from both. Another interesting rule is that if you're someone that is still working past your RMD age, you can actually delay taking your RMD from your current employer plan as long as you also are not a 5% owner of the business. And you can actually delay it until April 1st of the year after you finally stop working. However, if you have a previous employer plan or an IRA, you would have to take an RMD from those accounts. You would just be able to avoid taking an RMD from that current employer plan where you're still working. The good news for our clients is that we track these rules for you. Our client service team does an amazing job making sure that They are calculating everyone's RMD. They know when your first year occurs, so you need to take your first RMD. And we're also proactively reaching out every year to make sure that you're taking it when you're supposed to and before the end of the year so that you don't have a penalty. So that is something that is one of our services that we support our clients with. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Harmony, who will talk about some RMD strategies for high net worth individuals.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Sam just reviewed, there are a lot of rules around RMDs that make them a somewhat complex financial element in and of themselves. But when we start beginning to look at it for high net worth individuals, which would be individuals or families who have a net worth of $1 million or more, especially those where the pre-tax dollars, meaning IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, make up a significant amount of that net worth, RMDs can start to get even more complicated and they require careful planning, which we're going to talk about throughout this webinar. So let's first start by discussing some of the reasons why high net worth individuals and families should be planning ahead for their future RMDs. The first one, which I'm sure came to everyone's mind as soon as we started talking about this, is higher tax brackets. Of course, that has an effect. So since RMDs are a function of the IRA account balance, the larger your IRA, the larger your RMD will be, and each dollar coming out of the IRA is going to be taxed as ordinary income to you. So when your RMD amount is in the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands, that represents a significant risk of being pushed into higher tax brackets for ordinary income purposes. Now, not only would you be paying more tax per dollar as your ordinary income tax rate, but IRMA may come into effect as well. For those who are not aware, IRMA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And you can see a chart here that shows how this comes into play. This is related to Medicare, which individuals become eligible for when they reach age 65. You'll be paying a Part B premium. The standard amount is $185 per month, which you can see on this top line. And there's also a Part D, which represents the prescription drugs portion. But as you start getting into higher tax brackets, you will pay an additional amount for those premiums for both Part B and Part D. It's calculated based on your modified adjusted gross income and actually for 2 years prior. So if someone who turns 65 and becomes Medicare eligible in 2025, this year, they're actually looking at your modified adjusted gross income for 2023, 2 years prior. So you have to kind of be aware of it even before you reach Medicare age. When you reach 63, that's a tax year that's going to matter for your future premiums. And as you can see on this chart, as your adjusted gross income increases, you can quickly start getting into the higher premium brackets. At the highest point, a married couple could pay almost $13,000 more per year than their peers who remain in the lowest IRMA Medicare bracket. So it's something to think about as you're planning. It does get recalculated every year. So if you have one really high income year, but that's not the norm, you'll pay higher premiums 2 years later, but not forever. So it's not a permanent increase, but it's something to think about, especially as you're planning for RMDs, which will not go away once you have to start taking them. It could really impact your healthcare expenses, even when you're on Medicare. And finally, there's an impact to your future beneficiaries under the 10-year rule. So Sam referred to the Secure Act. There's also the Secure Act 2.0, both within the last 6 years were released, and they impacted the way that beneficiaries of IRA, particularly non-spouse beneficiaries, receive and have to withdraw inherited IRA assets. Prior to that legislation, they could stretch out their RMDs over their own lifetime. So it was a very small amount they had to take out each year. Now, any non-spouse beneficiaries must distribute the entire account within 10 years of the original owner's passing, and they'll be paying their own ordinary income tax rates on each dollar that comes out. When you think about many beneficiaries being adult children who, at the time that their parents passed away, that child might be at the height of their own career in their earned income years. So this can represent a pretty significant tax cost, right? If they're adding significant inherited IRA withdrawals every year for 10 years, on top of their own earned household income, that means that a lot of this inherited money is going to get eaten up by taxes on the higher end of the brackets potentially. So especially again for these high net worth individuals where it's a big IRA balance that's going to have to be distributed in a compressed amount of time, only 10 years, that can represent some significant tax risks. So something you want to plan for ahead of time to help mitigate that as much as possible. So what can we do, right? We can't change the RMD rules. And once you hit that age, there's not going to be much that you can do about it. It is what it is based on your IRA account balance and the factors that it's going to be divided by to calculate. So how do we reduce the negative impact of RMDs, particularly around taxes, and especially, as I just mentioned, when it comes to heirs? Well, there's a quote that I like from Alan Lakin, who said that planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. And that's very relevant when we think about RMDs, right? You don't have to take them until age 73 or 75, but you have the ability to take from those accounts earlier. And that's where a lot of this strategic planning comes into play. So taking advantage of the gap years is kind of the philosophy behind it. And so here are some of the important ages to be aware of. When someone reaches age 59 and a half, they have the ability to withdraw from their IRAs without penalty. Prior to that, there's a 10% early withdrawal penalty that comes into effect for many distributions that come out early. There are some workarounds, which is beyond what we're going to talk about today, but that's really an important age. At that point, you can take from your IRA without worrying about being penalized for it. At age 60 seems to be an age where a lot of people are at least thinking about retirement. Maybe they're right there at the door of retirement. Maybe they're planning for it within the next decade or so. But it's a time when a lot of folks are thinking about it. How do I stop or scale back my full-time work and approach this, retirement era of my life? At age 65, that's when you become Medicare eligible. IRMA becomes a factor. Actually, you could argue it would be at age 63. That's 2 years before when that tax started to matter for your IRMA premium increases. At age 70 and a half, you become eligible to make QCDs, which Sam is going to talk about in more detail later. And at age 73 or 75, your RMDs actually begin. So you have all this time from 59 and a half to 73 or 75, between 13 and 15 years that you have this gap years where you have the most flexibility and the most option to do some strategic planning. So when we talk about strategic withdrawals before RMD age, some people feel if I'm not forced to take out and pay taxes on it, why would I want to? There actually are a lot of reasons why you might want to. You might take out withdrawals to cover your living expenses, right? Once you're retired, your portfolio is likely going to be supporting your cash flow needs at some point. So you may want to use IRAs to do that, even if you have other tax buckets available, right? You may have a taxable account. You may have a large cash reserve on the side that you could pull from tax-free. You might have a Roth that you could pull from. Why would you want to pay taxes on the IRA? Well, we'll get into that in a minute, but that's one reason why you might want to. You might also want to reinvest it, right? If we're talking about it, some of the goal is just to get money out of the IRA where every dollar is taxed at ordinary income rates and move it to a place where it's more tax advantaged, whether a taxable account or a Roth. So reinvest it where it's not coming out of the market, it's just coming out of the IRA is an option. And creative strategies such as QCDs or Roth conversions. Again, Sam's going to explain those in a moment, but those are some of the uses that you might find for these IRA dollars before RMD age. Why would you want to? One reason might be to fill up lower tax brackets. Perhaps once you're not working, especially if you were thinking of living off of just cash or, other tax advantage dollars, you may be in a point where you're paying little or potentially even no taxes for the early years of your retirement, which sounds nice in theory, but then you're realizing I'm actually giving up the opportunity to fill up these lower tax brackets. And we're actually right now in our country in a historically low tax rate environment, which may or may not continue over the long term. So it's something to think about. Many states also have retirement income exclusions. Thinking of New York, where many of our clients reside, that is a $20,000 retirement income exclusion, meaning that each individual can take up to $20,000 from retirement accounts. This includes IRAs, 401ks, private pensions would count towards that as well. And those first 20,000 is not taxed at all for New York State purposes. So you want to use that up every year that you can for both you and your spouse, if you have one, to take advantage of it. It's use it or lose it each year. Transferring future growth into tax advantaged accounts, right? So you have your wealth, you're hoping that it continues to grow as the markets go up over time. Do you want that growth to be in the IRA where all the growth will be taxed at ordinary income rates, your highest rates? Or can we move it somewhere else, like a taxable account or a Roth, where that growth is now going to be taxed at a more favorable rate or potentially not at all? And then finally, controlling the IRA balance for our beneficiaries. We talked about that before. Your beneficiaries, besides your spouse, right? Your spouse gets to treat it as their own IRA, but once it goes to children, maybe siblings, nieces, nephews, those people are going to have to take it out within 10 years. So keeping that IRA balance small and instead putting your assets into other types of accounts that are more tax advantageous is going to be beneficial, not just for you, but for your family overall as you build this generational wealth. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Sam to go into more detail on some of the strategies that we've been alluding to.
Thank you, Harmony. So Harmony was just talking about some strategic withdrawals when considering your future RMD planning, and we are going to dive into qualified charitable distributions first. So what this is a tax-free charitable donation withdrawn directly from your IRA and sent to a charity of your choice. You have to be 70 and a half to qualify to be able to do this. And then once you're older than that, you can continue to do them for the rest of your life. When you are looking to send it to a charity, it has to be a 501c3. And to make sure that you're doing this properly, you also must receive a confirmation letter from the charity stating that no goods or services were exchanged for the contribution. But what's so advantageous about this is that tax-free benefit. So not only is it federally tax-free, but New York State also qualifies for that New York State tax-free treatment. Not every state offers that, so that's something that you should look into if you live somewhere that's outside of New York State. And that's something that your advisor can help you with as well. So who is a good fit? It's someone that is charitably inclined. So maybe you're someone that you already make donations to charities, or you're thinking about it, seriously thinking about it for the future. You have an IRA, of course, we're talking about RMDs, so that is what's relevant to today's conversation. And you are RMD age or at least 70 and a half. So not only can you start doing this before RMD age and maybe just take advantage of making those donations during those years because you're doing it anyway and lowering your potential future RMD amount by chipping away at your IRA balance, it also will count towards your RMD once you have to start taking them. So that's another huge benefit of doing a QCD. So just briefly going over some of the tax benefits, I already hit how it's a tax-free distribution, but again, it counts towards your RMD. So let's look at scenario 2 here. Phil's annual RMD is $15,000. He then decides to make a $15,000 QCD donation to a charity of his choice. That means that he has fully satisfied his RMD requirement for that year, and it was tax-free on those $15,000. That is a huge benefit to someone that is in this kind of situation. And lastly, it's more advantageous than charitable cash contributions in most circumstances, and that's because you have to itemize to take charitable cash contributions off on your taxes. But doing a QCD works in conjunction with the standard deduction, which is what most people are taking these days given the current tax code environment. So based on that, you can have a full write-off of your QCD donation in that year and take the standard deduction, which again, huge benefit for you. And some considerations for you moving forward. If you're someone that would like to do this, the limit is $108,000 for this year, and it does go up slightly ever so often per individual. So most people's RMDs are less than that, but if that is your full amount, you could be doing up to $108,000 in donations there directly from your IRA. You can do as many QCD donations as you would like in a year as long as you stay under that limit. And you can go beyond your RMD amount as well if you would like to donate more. And of course, get that tax-free treatment. What we generally do for our clients is we set them up with something that's called the QCD checkbook, which is a checkbook that is linked directly to your IRA. And that way you can write a check and kind of have that personal touch. You can drop off the check yourself or mail it from your personal residence, but then you feel like you are having an interaction with that charity that you care about, even though the money is coming from your IRA rather than your bank account. And lastly, make sure that your tax preparer is reporting it correctly. Just communicate that you did one. And if you need any guidance on that, we would be happy to advise as well. We're also going to talk about Roth conversions. And this can be another way to strategically withdraw from your IRA. And specifically, Harmony was talking about gap years. So first off, a Roth conversion is the process of moving assets from a pre-tax type of account, like a 401k, traditional IRA, into a Roth IRA, and you pay taxes on the dollars on the amount of the conversion that you did in that tax year. So it adds to your taxable income level. So earlier, Harmony was saying, let's target gap years for some of these strategies in years where you're in lower tax brackets, because we want to make sure that it makes sense that you're doing this during a year where you're in a lower tax bracket rather than paying higher taxes in the future. So if you look at the graph at the top left here, I have an example of this. So we have some income here that shows the light blue on the left is someone's salary, and then they retire. So they don't have that income level anymore. Then they are purely living off of IRA distributions as well as some Social Security when that kicks in. And you can see over on the right, the orange represents their future RMD requirement that they have to take out once they reach that certain age. And then we have that deep red line that shows their total expenses. So how much cash flow do they actually need to live off of? And in those earlier years, in the gap years between they retired and then they have to take RMDs, their income is lower, which means that they're in a lower tax bracket. So that would represent those years where they could take advantage of doing some Roth conversions to really lower their future RMDs potentially, and also their lifetime taxes owed, as long as it makes sense for them strategically. The cons to this would be you have that immediate tax liability in that year, so you have to be comfortable with that. And that's why you would work with an advisor to make sure that the amount that you're converting makes sense. And you should consider doing this if you have cash on hand to pay the taxes rather than withholding from the conversion amount itself, because you want to maximize the amount of dollars going into that Roth IRA to make it worth it. Another consideration is that, once you are RMD age, you have to take your RMD before you can do a Roth conversion, which is another reason to do it during the gap years. You want to do it when you're not pushing yourself into an even higher tax rate. So that's something to just keep in mind for future planning. And then lastly, it's advantageous to do this during times of volatility. So, keep that in mind for, maybe the near term. If there's more volatility, is it time to look into doing a Roth conversion with your account? On the top right here, you can see an example of someone that chose to do a pretty sizable Roth conversion. And then there was a market rebound all the way on the right, which shows that they had $25,000 of growth that avoided taxation. So it can be pretty impactful to do it at the right time and during the right years. All right, so I'm going to hand it back to Harmony, who will go over an RMD planning case study that really shows how RMD management would impact you over the long term.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of information today. So Sam and I felt that maybe an example, not a real life example, but just an example of a fictional person might help illustrate really the impact of all this. So let's meet our retiree. Her name is Penny, and after a successful career, she retires at age 62 with a 401k of 1.5 million. And she also has taxable assets of 1 million between a brokerage account, maybe some CDs and some cash on the side. Her living expenses are 60,000 per year. And she's not married, but she does have 2 adult children that are successfully established. Don't need any financial support from her at this time. Now, as Penny approached retirement, she realized she needed to engage a financial advisor. And so she interviewed and engaged Bill and decided to work with him to help with her investment management, although she also learned along the way how much he could help her with some of the strategic planning as well. As part of the early discussions, she learned about RMDs for the first time. And at first, she was thrilled to hear that she wouldn't have to take any money from the IRA for 13 years. She's 62, her RMD age is 75. She has a lot of years that she feels she can live off of her cash and taxable assets and avoid taxes altogether, perhaps, or pay a very small amount given the tax treatment of those kind of assets. However, as she and Bill started to talk more about the impact of RMDs down the road, Penny started to realize that she might need to be a little more proactive in her planning and in her IRA withdrawal strategy. So Bill did some tax projections to show Penny what that might look like at age 75 and showed her that since she no longer had any earned income, she's now retired, not earning any money, and she was electing to delay Social Security, she'd be in the 10% tax bracket if she decided to live off of her tax. Really, all she'd have income-wise would be some portfolio, dividend and interest income. However, when they looked forward, Bill estimated that her IRA balance at RMD age at age 75 would be 3.4 million. That's using a 6% annual return, which I use for all these calculations. And that would mean her first year RMD would be over 127,000. So when he looked at her adding that additional 127,000 of earned income that year, plus her Social Security, which she'd be taking at that time, as well as gains in portfolio income on the taxable side, she'd be pushed into the 24% bracket and possibly even cross the line to the 32% bracket. Again, this is all kind of a using current tax law, which may or may not be in play for that long, but we'll use what we know now for the assumptions. Her projected taxable assets at 75 would be about $924,000. No Roth assets. I'm leaving that there as a placeholder for some planning that we're going to do, giving her a total after-tax portfolio value of $3.5 million at age 75. If her children were to inherit it at that time, they'd each inherit about $1.7 million in IRA dollars, meaning that they'd have to take out $170,000 each on top of their earned income each year for 10 years to get it withdrawn in the time frame, and they'd be paying tax on that. And they'd only receive a tax-free inheritance of $462,000 each. That's the taxable account, which they receive a step-up in cost basis. So it essentially would not be any tax implication to them to receive that. Well, as she started looking at that, she wasn't feeling so great anymore about her plan to delay from the IRAs until RMD age. And so Bill put together some recommendations for her and recommended that first off, in her first year of retirement, she's 62. So she's not taking Social Security, as I mentioned. She's not affected by IRMA yet. She's not within 2 years of Medicare age. So she has a lot of flexibility in this particular year. So he recommended that she first start off by executing a $120,000 Roth conversion. That would keep her in low tax brackets, but fill them up completely. So we utilize them and would start the clock as early as possible on the tax-free compounding that happens in a Roth IRA. So that was what they did in the first year. As they move forward in ongoing years, they planned to utilize her IRA for her living expenses. So taking those withdrawals and spending them and leaving the taxable assets and then her Roth converted amount to grow, and also conducting some additional Roth conversions as her tax situation allows, which would mean that each year they looked at it, they would add in Social Security into the factoring once it came into play. They'd be looking at the IRMA brackets, the tax brackets for ordinary income, and converting up to a point that made sense, meaning using up these lower brackets, as we've talked about, and putting any other money she didn't need towards Roth conversion. So we're moving the money from a place where it's going to be taxed at ordinary income rates to a place where it's not going to be taxed anymore for herself or her future heirs down the road. And they've also discussed possibly doing QCDs at age 70 and a half, which was a long way out for her, but something that intrigued her as she had some charitable interests. Well, as they did some more projecting, this is what they found was the effects and impact of their planning. So now instead of having a $3.4 million IRA balance at 75, it was 1.1 million, a much lower amount for the IRAs, still substantial, but leaving only a first year RMD of about 44,000. So much more manageable. And that's actually a number that's under what she was already spending for her living expenses. So it didn't represent a big change for her, right? Some folks, they don't take anything from their IRA. All of a sudden they hit RMD age and they have to take, in this case, 120,000. And that's a huge change for them. In this case, Penny would already be taking at least that, 60,000 of living expenses. So this isn't even a change for her. The RMD, at least at first, falls under that level. Her marginal tax bracket is staying low because she's only forced to take out that 44,000 instead of the larger amount. So she's in the 12% to 22% bracket, depending on whether she continues to take out additional funds or possibly, make some more Roth conversions since her RMD is so small. Her taxable and Roth assets, which have been able to grow over time since she wasn't tapping into them early, are now at 2.1 million and 1 million, giving her a total after-tax portfolio value of 3.75 million. She saved about $250,000 in taxes at this point in time, just a snapshot, but it's a really impactful number. Also, from her heirs' perspective, the amount they'd inherit in the IRA would only be about $580,000 each, meaning they have to take out a little less than $60,000 a year. Still a lot, but not nearly as impactful as the 160 that would be at much higher rates. And the tax-free inheritance they'd receive in the form of stepped-up taxable assets and the Roth is about 1.5 million. So that's tripled compared to what it would have been previously. This really shows how doing some proactive planning, and it really wouldn't have changed her lifestyle that much. She's still living off the same amount. It's just doing the right things financially to pay low taxes now so that you or your heirs don't have to pay high tax rates later. She took control of her situation early and gave herself greater flexibility in the later years of her retirement and really maximized the generational wealth for her two adult children by starting that Roth IRA, getting some tax-free compounding, leaving the step up eligible assets to grow over time. And so she minimized the taxes paid for her family overall, as opposed to just trying to pay zero taxes for the first few years of retirement. So hopefully you got something out of today's webinar. We thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions about how RMD planning might fit into your financial picture, please reach out to us. We'd love to have that discussion with you and develop a customized strategy for you to proactively plan for your RMDs. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.